Welcome to the second installment of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program's Ottoman Greeks of the United States Digital History Project's Remembering 1922 video series. In this and all upcoming episodes of the series, the names of the interviewees have been coded to protect their identity. One of the main themes that has been documented by immigration scholarship is the absence of transgenerational knowledge about the immigrant experience. This episode centers on the absence of that knowledge, expressed as silence. In this episode, we focus on how that silence is articulated by descendants of Ottoman Greek immigrants. How does that silence make the immigrants' descendants feel? How do they respond to it? And where does the response lead them? In sum, this episode shines a light on silence and its impacts on the descendants' generation. One of the reasons that silence is found in collective family knowledge of Ottoman Greeks' descendants is trauma. In this first clip, Rebecca provides evidence of silence resulting from trauma as expressed by her father, who was born in Arankoi.
You know, my dad didn't talk about it too much. He always said, that's why he didn't speak Greek at home to us children. I'm an American. I speak English. You know, this is my home. I think he really, really wanted to put that out of his mind. I think it was so traumatic for him.
Likewise, Costa reflected on the complete erasure of his great-grandfather's past from Hoshkoi through his recollections of his grandmother.
She didn't talk about it that much. Sometimes she learned Greek. Her father made sure that all of her children learned Greek, and she would speak Greek occasionally, but I didn't understand it. But she wouldn't talk that much about it, really about him, that I can recall. Now, maybe my father and his siblings probably heard a little bit more than I did, but that's been, passed down to me, some of that information. But she didn't speak of it that much. Her upbringing, of course, she was born in Richmond, and I have very little on that as far as her experiences.
Information about the cause for the immigration of Julia's grandfather from Ordu to Canton, Ohio, was also not known by her family members.
She also said she never heard why my papu left Ordu in 1906. He didn't talk about anything much about the old times. And I remember my dad and aunts and stuff saying that too, that he didn't really talk a lot about like the situation or why he left or anything like that.
Trauma leading to silence was also expressed by Mary, whose maternal grandfather was born in Istanbul, but had family ties in Tokat.
My mother's mother, I think she was born in Thessaloniki. That's what I was told. I don't have records confirming where she was born. It's not clear to me when she emigrated to the United States or who she emigrated with, because the records that I have from my aunt is that her family may have been here much earlier, like 1912, and settled in the Denver, Colorado community. But it's not clear because there's conflicting records. And my mother's father was born in 1891 in Constantinople or Istanbul, depending on who you talk to and what they call it. And then his family were rug merchants, from my understanding, and then moved into the interior of Anatolia, into Tokat, where they lived. The way that my mother described is that the record sort of goes silent during the Armenian genocide. I don't know that he ever explained it clearly to her or her sisters, because it sounds like he got caught up in it. And it was so traumatizing that he just was one of the many who just didn't talk about it. Do you know what I mean? Just wanted to forget about all of it. Didn't talk about relatives, he was, I don't have relatives. We found out later he had a cousin in the islands somewhere, but the family was there was never discussion about his family.
Andrew also recalled trauma leading to silence experienced by both maternal and paternal grandparents who immigrated from the island of Marmara to the United States.
They did not talk very much about being from Marmara. And I think, they left under very dire circumstances. So, they never really spoke about it. In the case of both of them actually, I think in 1915, or between 1915 and 1918, my papu's parents were put in an internment camp by the Turks, and they died there. So, my papu never spoke about it. He had a younger sister who was 14, and she also died in that internment camp. And then my yaya, her parents died in 1922 when they had the big population exchange, as the Greeks would call it, the catastrophe. So both of them, even though they were older, they were adults. They both had lost their parents and were orphans, and they never spoke about it. They just didn't speak about it.
In some cases, interviewees emphasized outward demeanor as indicative of trauma. For example, Monica offered the following rendition of her parents' demeanor. They were born in Gölbakçe and Tirilye and immigrated to Ohio.
I would say that my parents were stoic, very strong, and you didn't complain. And you just worked hard, and you really didn't talk about all this hardship that they went through. It was just amazing to me later when I found out about it. But no, she did not. No, neither did my father. No.
In other cases, there is some scant evidence of traumatic experiences that caused the descendants' family members to not share information. Such was the case for Debbie, whose maternal grandmother fled from Ekinlik, and for Helen, whose maternal grandmother was from Alaçatı and grandfather from Izmir. According to Debbie,
my parents did not talk about it. Apparently even my grandparents didn't talk about it much. I think they were pretty traumatized from it. My grandmother, she lost a brother and her mother, and possibly her father. And I think they put it out of their mind, and but they were very active in the church, so they did assimilate in that regard.
In addition to trauma, Carol and several descendants of immigrants and refugees from the late Ottoman Empire also articulated how they experienced the absence of knowledge about their past in relation to their identity.
My grandfather from my mom's side, the one from Miryoftan, he, the one thing I remember, I think growing up, I didn't understand, okay, we're Greek, but how come we were from Turkey? I think that confused me as a child. And he didn't really talk about his life there as much. But the only thing he said to me when I was like 10 years old was that there's no greater country than America. And so it made me think that maybe life was hard.
Like Carol, Helen's experience of this silence also resulted in an existential crisis for her personal identity. In her own words,
the big picture is that my yaya from Asia Minor, from Alaçatı, would not talk about it. Like, I know things because I've worked hard to get information, and I've done research and found cousins I didn't know I had in Australia and in Greece. But she would not talk about her life. And for the longest time, like growing up, we were Greek, right? And she was Greek. She spoke Greek. I never even knew she wasn't from Greece. I didn't know, I didn't know anything about this whole situation. And in my child mind, I figured, oh, she's old and she doesn't remember. That's why she won't talk about it. And I'm thinking she's from Greece, and she doesn't remember. And then later I found out she wasn't even from Greece. She was from Turkey. And I'm like, how could she be from Turkey? I didn't know anything about the history.
A similar experience of lacking knowledge of her identity was given by Heather, whose ancestors were from Alanya. To fill in the void left by her ancestors' silence, Heather was fortunate enough to have a book that referred to them.
So this document that I'm reading from is basically my great-grandmother's story that was written by her children when she told it. Then this little book was published.
Finally, a personal diary, not a published memoir, helped Debbie envision her grandmother's escape from the island of Kutali.
I remember my ayah telling me that they ran into the hills and escaped. That's all I know directly from her. And then she said, then she came to the United States. Like I said, they didn't talk about it. It was like a sore subject. Even my mom didn't know a whole lot. She knew basically what I said. That they ran in the hills to escape. And that's what was in her journal.
In conclusion, this episode presented evidence of Ottoman Greek descendants articulating silence about migration and identity due to trauma suffered by their ancestors. For some of the interviewees, that silence motivated them to research their family's history. Their findings provided them with some level of understanding about their past and a deeper knowledge of their own identity in connection to immigration writ large. The researchers at the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program's Ottoman Greeks of the United States Digital History Project would like to thank you, our listeners, for your support of this important research. We look forward to your comments and hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed producing it. See you next time.